Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. An evangelist was preaching, and he said that Moses came with 10 commandments. And the first commandment was, "Thou shalt have no other God before me. God is one." And he said that because people didn't understand that, entire libraries began to be built full of hundreds and thousands of books trying to explain that. At the core of our understanding, at the core of our relationship with truth, is La ilaha illallah. I do not exist. Only Allah exists. Allah alone is. To comprehend that, we have to be able to break through the veils that separate us from God, that separate us from truth, that separate us from mercy, compassion, and all of the qualities that are Allah. Allah is the first. Allah is the foremost. Allah is that natural thing that existed before and exists after. We are the created being. Within us is a part of the divine which we refer to as the soul. Allah blew a soul into each one of his creations. And our path is to discover that soul. Our path is to discover the connection between that soul that we have and the divine. In school, everyone takes history courses. And history is an interesting word. It has two parts in it. First part is his, and the second part is story. So history is his story. And history is usually, in this world, referred to the story of individual men and what they went through in this life, or individual nations and how they rose and fell and rose again, or how civilizations came into being and what happened. It tells the story of what occurred in this world, in the world of creation. So history is a methodology that man uses to explain his life on this earth and what occurred. And of course, history always has a point of view, and usually that point of view is dependent on who's writing the history. But if we go on this path, if we go on the path of Sufism, Tasawwuf, the path to find the truth, the first question that we ask is, who am I? Now, when somebody asks you this question, usually they say, nice to meet you. What do you do? Who are you? What's your name? These kinds of things. All of these refer to your life within this earth, to your life within this elemental world. We came and we were dropped into this elemental world. And we now exist in this elemental world as a creation of our Lord. While in this elemental world, we work at making a life for ourselves in this world, making our way through this world, establishing ourselves in many, many different ways. We educate ourselves, we get a worldly education. We find ways to make a living, to be able to earn money to buy food and to support ourselves. We find ways to create housing for ourselves. We find many ways to make our way through this world. And there are constant help. There is constant help for us in doing this. We're educated, and there's an economic system that we fit into in order to get things done. But in truth, if we want to know ourselves, do we know ourselves by explaining our education, by explaining where we were born, by explaining what we do for a living, by explaining what religion that we're in? Do we understand who we are by way of all of these surface things? Or is there a deeper truth to us? Is there a deeper reality to us? And do we spend our time looking for that deeper reality, or are we so intrigued by the play that we are in this world that that play is our entire existence? Each of us is an actor in this play of the world, and each of us is attached to that act, and each of us tries to improve that act. We try to fulfill our needs and desires in that act. And this act that we put on in this world can take all of our time and all of our life. But what is the end result of this act? What is the finale? How does the play end? What happens before the final curtain goes down? And the finale for everybody is the same. We are temporary creations who have a lifetime, and that lifetime ends and the play is over. And what difference does it make if they gave you medals and honors and held you in high esteem in this world prior to your death? What does it do for you? What has it done for you? Well, the truth is, reality is, hakikat is, if you want to know who you really are, you have to take that next step beyond the play that we're in this world. You have to take the next step towards understanding that other part of yourself, that soul that is hidden within you and that is covered by the veils of this world and by your attachments to this world. So the initial question that should be asked is, how are we attached to this world? And why are we attached to this world? Well, the way we're attached to this world is through our egocentric self, through the understanding that we are somehow an independent actor and we have to provide for ourselves, and that we, through our effort alone, are doing what's being done on our behalf. And this leads to a kind of arrogance that exists within all men from inception. And this arrogance involves all phases of our being. We act, we do, we accomplish, we are the arbiters of what happens next in our existence. And our effort is what determines what is going on in our life. Well, again, we need to understand that arrogance, that self-importance, is a temporary illusion that lasts for a certain period of time and then disappears, no matter how arrogant we are. But we also need to understand that all the difficulties that we have in this world come about because of our attachment to ourselves. Why do we get angry? Because people or circumstances have somehow insulted us. People or circumstances have somehow violated us. So we get angry. Why do we feel shame? Because things have happened in our life that embarrassed us, and we feel shame. Now, notice the operative word is always us. Why are we jealous? Because somebody has more than us, and we feel deprived. The operative word is us. As long as we see ourselves as separate from everybody else, as distinct from everybody else, as individuated and alone, all of the difficulties that come with the world we are going to have. Now, how do we get rid of these problems? As long as we stay on the stage of the world and we interact on the stage of the world, all the worldly dilemmas are going to be our dilemmas. All of the worldly difficulties are going to be our difficulties. Now, to tell somebody that the way you get rid of these difficulties is to disappear, to stop being involved with the self, that in fact, this self that you spend so much time with and that is so important to you is but a temporary manifestation that's going to disappear and be forgotten, and all of this effort that you're making for the self is of no consequence, is a very difficult pill to swallow for most people, because everybody's so busy acting on this stage and trying to put their resume together. trying to put their accomplishments together, trying to put their power together, trying to show their importance to the world. And nobody wants to give it up. Nobody wants to give their importance in the world up because they believe that their satisfaction comes from the world. They believe that the new house is going to give them satisfaction. The new car is going to give them satisfaction. The better job is going to give them satisfaction. More power is going to give them satisfaction. All kinds of worldly things will give them satisfaction. And in truth, there is no lasting satisfaction in what the world has to offer you. In La ilaha illallah, we acknowledge that only Allah exists and we do not. But what happens when we disappear? We merge into effulgence. Now, in English, it's difficult to describe Allah's world. There aren't enough words for it. Effulgence means light, brilliance. So as we disappear, the light enters, the brilliance enters, God enters. And then we begin to know our true story, as opposed to our artificial story, as opposed to the story of creation. We begin to know the story of Creator, of the Creator. So when somebody asks you, what's your story? In order to truly know your story, you have to know His story. Because if what you are concentrating on is the description of yourself, who and what you are on the stage of this elemental world, you have missed the purpose of this creation. You have missed the purpose of this life. You have missed the reason for our creation, which is to come and know our Lord. And you've substituted the glitters and the hypnotisms and the magnetisms and the fireworks of this world for the effulgence that is reality, for the effulgence that is the truth, for the kingdom where Allah lives and where you can enter into if you do away with the arrogance that keeps you in place in this physical world. The Sufis say to die before death. And essentially, it's a proclamation that death is coming. Death is the reality. But if you're capable of doing it before the end comes, you are capable of entering into the effulgence of the light prior to your death. You are capable of entering the truth of God prior to your death. You are capable of bypassing all of the difficulties of this world prior to your exit. You're capable of transcending all of the things that cause us such heartache and such difficulty and such impossible situations that we're constantly trying to resolve. But because of our attachment to the self, we're constantly trying to make the self more. We're constantly trying to clean the self or resolve the self within the worldly situations. There is no resolution to our worldly situations. Think back on your life. Think back into your memory banks. You had one problem and then you resolved it. And then what happened? You had another problem. And then that got resolved or forgotten. And then you had another problem. And then that got resolved or forgotten. And then you had another problem. And the problems that we had 30 or 40 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, how important are they to us now? But how much did they press against us at the moment that they occurred? How much did they press against us? And how much pain did they cause us while they were going on? We need to find a way through this. And the way through this is to understand that we are not this physical body. We are not the consequences of our acts on this stage. We are not that actor. We are something transcendent beyond all of that. And when we can transcend beyond all of that, we change our relationship to this world. Now, my teacher, Muhammad Muhaiyaddeen, was here in Philadelphia and simultaneously wasn't here. He was in the world, but not of the world. And we need to be able to develop ourselves in that way. We need to be in the world, but not of the world. We have to appear to believe in the world, but we have to truly believe in God. And we have to be rid of this narcissism that each of us has with our own being. We have to fall out of love with ourselves and transfer that love to God. We have to fall out of love with the temporary manifestations of this world and transfer that love towards that which is divine, that which is everlasting, that which is immortal, that which has no beginning, that which has no end. It's in that transfer that love that we have for ourselves transforms into divine love, from conditional love into divine love. We love ourselves because we're going to take care of ourselves, because we are the one who will do the most for us. We love then, our love then extends to other people because of what they can do for us. These are all conditional situations. We need to go away from conditional situations and enter into unconditional situations. Now, part of the problem and part of what goes on is, in this world, our relationships are conditional. We get along with people for a while, and then there's tyranny. There's treachery, because other people's own love for themselves is greater than their love for you. So they abandon you, or they try to hurt you when they feel it will somehow benefit them. But God has no treachery. God has no deceit. God has no evil. God has no shame. God has no jealousy. God doesn't have all of these things that men have that causes them to turn against other men. So God is closer to you than your own parents. God is going to do more for you than your own parents. And you have to understand this. You have to understand that there is a safe place in this world. There is a place that you can depend on in this world. And it's not of this world. It's as close to us as anything we see, but we can't see it. We can't hear it, but it's with us every moment. And that is our Creator, who maintains us, sustains us, and keeps us in being. And He does it out of unconditional love for us. So we have this love available to us. But as long as we are looking for the same kind of love from the world, we are constantly going to be caught up in praise and blame. No matter how much good you do, there will be people who will blame you. No matter what you do on behalf of people, those same people will blame you. If you loan somebody money and get them out of a jam, later on, they will blame you because they have to pay you back and you expect them to pay you back. And that's your fault. You shouldn't have given them the money in the first place because you knew they couldn't pay you back. There is constantly going to be blame, even though it doesn't make any sense. And there's no real reason for it. It's just one narcissism opposing another narcissism. And when that happens, there's always going to be blame, and there's going to be hatred, and there's going to be resentment. When we can bypass the need for worldly praise, we begin to transcend this world and transcend our egocentric self. Allah gave us advanced qualities. He gave us the ability to have wisdom. He gave us the ability to do things. He gave us the ability to figure out things. Now, dependent on how we use that, our future is put into place. We can either use all of the attributes that Allah has given us to build our home in this world, or we can use the attributes that He has given us to build our home in His kingdom. If we build our home in this world, then we are creating a home in hell. If we build our home in His kingdom, then we are creating an everlasting existence for ourselves. And how do we build our home in His kingdom? We build our home in His kingdom through understanding His gracious qualities, His gracious attributes, and taking on those qualities and those attributes and using those qualities and those attributes in our interaction with others, in our interaction with the world, in our interaction with all of humanity, to where the differences between ourselves and everyone else begin to disappear to the point where we don't have to separate ourselves from other people anymore, where we don't have to be more important than other people anymore, where we become humble and small. Allah is so small that we can't see him, yet he is everywhere. Allah is the beggar to the beggar and the king to the king. He is the poet to the poet and the novelist to the novelist. Whatever it is that we are, he is greater than we are. So if we become small, he becomes smaller than us and lifts us. If we become big, the opposite occurs. So we have to become small and understand that in our smallness comes our greatness, that in our disappearing comes our immortality. In our disappearing comes our everlasting life. And to do this, we have to give up the stage that we're on in this world and the attempt to get all of the audience to give us standing ovations every time we say a word, to have all of the audience give us accolades for our performance. We have a funny media in this world. We have people in this world who's, especially in America, whose main job is just to get their picture and stories about them in the media. They don't do anything. They are just in the media. And by being in the media, they are able to amass fortunes because they can sell products that they put forth while being in the media, because people buy what they see and what they think they need. And if people are important, all of a sudden importance is given to what they have to sell, to what they have to give away. Things are upside down. Things are not understood. Things are not real. And we take this non-reality as our life, and it's not. And because we take this non-reality as our life, we go through all the trauma of all of the emotional difficulties that man has. So if we want to get out of the emotional difficulties that we find ourselves in, if we want to get out of shame, out of jealousy, out of need, out of desire, we have to begin to let go of the egocentric self. We have to let go of ourselves. We have to allow ourselves not to be the most important thing in our existence. Saints occupy themselves in helping others. Saints have given up trying to make themselves bigger, and they try to make others more, to supply what others need. As long as we are focused on our own needs, the lack of getting those needs is going to cause us trauma and cause us emotional pain. And only when we give up constantly working to satisfy our needs will we be rid of all of the pain that comes because of not achieving what our expectations are. So think about it. If we don't have expectations in the world, we don't have disappointments in the world. But as long as we have expectations, every time expectations aren't met, we become disappointed. And depending on who we are, those disappointments lead to various levels of emotional pain. And it's all because we've forgotten who we really are. We think we are this bag of bones walking through this world, but we're not. We are this light body inside of ourselves that moves on after this bag of bones dissipates and disappears. And if we can recognize that, and if we can understand that, and if we can detach ourselves from that, we will become more. And what does it mean to become more? It means to become godlike. And the way to do it is to hold mercy and compassion more important than our own needs. Now, the interesting thing about words that come into action, like mercy and compassion, is mercy is something you do on behalf of somebody else. Compassion is something you do on behalf of somebody else. Love is something that you give on behalf of somebody else. So, and what is it that Allah does for us? He is constantly giving to us to sustain and maintain us. So we need to begin to act like He does, which is to give on behalf of others, to help maintain and sustain others, to bring others' lives into a better position so that they can also transcend their existence and leave the pain that they are in. But in so much of the world, the purpose is to keep everybody in their place, to not allow people to expand, to not allow people to grow, but to rule over them in such a way that they control their thought and they control what it is they do and how they think. We need to get beyond that. Fortunately, for those of us who live in democracies, we can think the way we want to think. We can express ourselves in the way that we want to express ourselves. Sufism is dangerous to autocratic systems because Sufism says your only master is Allah, and the only master you have to answer to is Allah. And the truth is that your relationship with Allah is the most important relationship in existence, not your relationship with anything else. So we need to do that for ourselves. We need to put our relationship with Allah at the forefront of our consciousness. And we need it to be more important than the relationship we have with ourselves. We need to do with Allah more than we do with ourselves. All praise is due to Allah, not to ourselves. And this focus has to shift from our egocentric self, our narcissistic self, to reality. And we have to begin to understand the non-elemental nature in existence. And the non-elemental is reality. The non-elemental doesn't come and go. The non-elemental is permanent, unlike the elemental, which disappears, which has conflict within itself. Within this body, there comes a time when the elements who are in an agreement to maintain this body begin to fall apart. They begin to lose their stability and the body then begins to fall apart. And it happens because that's the nature of the elements. The nature of truth is different. We need to be able to find the nature of truth, the nature of reality, the nature of the place where there is no animosity, where there is no jealousy, where there is no hatred, where there is no dispute, where there is no separation, where there is unity and being that is compassionate and merciful. And if we can do that, if we can understand that, we can find our way out of all of our difficulties, and we can transcend this world and exist in a place of bliss and peace and joy, because we've lost the attachment to ourselves. This attachment to ourselves is at the crux of all of our problems. All of our fears come because of our attachment to ourselves. All of our difficulties come from that place. If we can leave that place, we can enter the truth. And not until we leave that place will we be able to enter the truth. And we have to consider this very strongly. Our true story is not the story of this body. Our true story is the story of Allah. And when we know that story, then we know who we truly are. May it come to pass that each of us understands that, and Allah opens up our heart so that we can know that story. Ameen. Ameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.